All right, I'm guessing people will keep dropping in as we go, but for folks who are new to City Bureau, thanks for joining us. For one, I see you've all muted your devices. We'll hold questions till the end. And just a quick note, we will be keeping this particular webinar to the City Scripters project, and we'll save more on our Documenters program, which is a whole other aspect that intersects with the City Scripters project, but is a bit different and more involved. So we'll hold that for another webinar down the line. So we'll do a quick introduction to ourselves and then go into documenters.org, and then spend most of our time on the City Scrapers code and process, and then we'll open it up to questions. So like I said, for folks who are new to City Bureau, our mission is to bring journalists and communities together in a collaborative spirit to produce media that is impactful, equitable, and responsive to the public. I'm Daryl Holliday, the co-founder of City Bureau and News Hub Director, and we also have our web developer, Pat, here, who is on mute, but will not be in a second.
We can't be.
Got it. So this mission in 3 ways. City Bureau has 3 programs. Our Civic Reporting Fellowship, which is a 10-week program that brings emerging journalists together with more experienced reporters, and they produce work collaboratively from our newsroom in the Southside Chicago that is published in publications across the city, across the country. Second, our public newsroom is a lot like what it sounds like. We open up our physical space once a week and bring in co-hosts. They can be journalists, organizers, educators, a wide range of people to share their thoughts and opinions on media-adjacent topics. That includes usually a lot of small group sessions and conversations with people in the community. And lastly, our Documents program, which we will spend most time talking about today. In a nutshell, we train and pay people in Chicago and Detroit to engage in the production of local news and information. That often looks like attending public meetings and producing live tweet threads, meeting notes, audio, video. That all goes to documenters.org. So I could spend a good amount of time talking about the site, but I want to just show this video because it will say it much more succinctly than I will. It takes only about a minute and a half. Oops. That didn't work. 1 second.
In your city or town, there are dozens, maybe even hundreds of public meetings each month. They're important spaces for democracy, where anyone can drop in and have a voice in local government. What happens in those meetings affects your everyday life, but there are so many hosted by all different agencies, and it's hard to keep up with all of them. Some are covered by local news, but a lot of them aren't. Some publish agendas, official votes, and thorough meeting notes, but a lot of them don't. Some are canceled, and nobody even notices. And all the information is split up on different websites, a lot that are hard to find or not updated regularly. At documenters.org, we're collecting and standardizing all this information so you can access it anytime. And we host free trainings and pay you to attend these meetings and take notes. Together, we're creating a new public record to shine the light on decisions being made in our city, because you deserve to know. Documenters.org. Find the meeting information you want, get trained and paid to go to them, and get our original reporting delivered to your inbox. Let's reimagine local journalism together.
So to quickly recap for folks that joined, welcome to the Free Scrapers webinar. We went through a quick introduction, so you didn't miss much. That was a video of our Documents website, which launched in January. So as a quick recap here, Documenters.org is meant to approach a few problems. One, local government bodies host thousands of public meetings every day, but the vast majority receive no media coverage and produce minimal records. We're scraping and standardizing and sharing locations, dates, times, and records held by these government agencies, and we're training and paying people to attend these meetings and publish the results in collaboration with local journalists. To date, we have around 9,000 public meetings scraped in Chicago, Detroit, and Pittsburgh. I'll give you a few other numbers. We are running around 79 scrapers covering 64 government agencies. In Chicago and Pittsburgh, our scrapers were built by a team of around 40 volunteer coders over the course of a year. In Detroit, we contracted 2 coders to replicate the same system in less than a month. So these scrapers have centralized around 6,000 local governmental documents in one searchable, easy-to-use website. In total, the work supports a network of around 500 documenters who have documented around 12,000 hours of public meetings over the last 2 years. Since launching documenters.org with the City Scrapers Code, we've heard from many, many folks around the country and as far away as Brazil and Europe. Hence the purpose of this webinar, to get all of us in one space to see who's interested in furthering the code in their own city and how we could be helpful. As we have begun to look at different cities, we found the same problem we saw in Chicago applies essentially everywhere, that these governmental agencies are posting meeting notes on dozens of different websites, even for a local area. So we haven't found one area yet where the local, county, and state meetings are all on the single page. In Chicago, we have done that. In Detroit, we are getting very close. In Pittsburgh, that process is fairly early on, but we hope to start the City Scrapers Code in more places and look forward to diving in on that code and the processes and answering your questions in a minute. So I'm going to kick it over to our developer, Pat, to talk a bit more about the code in more particulars, and then we'll get into questions.
Do you want to just mute here?
Yeah.
Hey. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So yeah, basically we just wanted to go over kind of the City Scrapers project more in detail now. So initially identifying for everybody who's kind of here and thinking through what goals you have for the project. Some folks might be more focused on specific topics. Most people are going to be focused on their area. In our case, we're primarily focused on meetings that are subject to the Open Meetings Act, but other folks have had a more general interest, kind of what do you hope for the project to accomplish, and what's your time frame for completion? So kind of the initial steps we have for folks are to build a team, whether it's volunteer, staff, contract, or a combination like we did, create an agency and organization table. This is something that we've definitely crowdsourced. We've also found kind of lists in single places before. There's a lot of different options there. Start scraping and then kind of set up the outputs. Where do you actually want a lot of this information to go? So yeah, initially you'll need to look at kind of where you're going to get kind of the development capacity. So if you have staff development expertise, then that makes it a lot easier. We've also contracted folks, so kind of looking into bounty systems where people are paid per scraper, a flat rate. It offers a little more flexibility than bringing on full-time staff. And then volunteer. People have definitely been motivated to contribute to this because they can see a very clear output. They write a scraper, it shows up, it's on a calendar or on a site. People who don't have development experience can contribute to that as well, whether it's research, project management. But one thing to note with this approach is that kind of building and especially maintaining A community of like open source volunteers can be pretty time and labor intensive. So that's just something to factor in, is that it may be volunteer, but it definitely can take a significant amount of time. So, and this is just an example of our public meetings agency table and Airtable, if people are familiar, kind of organizing as much information as we could find about these different agencies, getting it in one spot, and from there kind of identifying which agencies have enough information online that we can scrape. It's also sometimes relevant to know which agencies aren't posting enough information, as well as kind of going through and seeing which ones would be easier, which ones can be broken out into issues, and kind of going from there. And here's where we kind of get to what it looks like to set up in your area. So after you've identified what you want to do with the project, identified a lot of the public agencies around you, the basic setup we're going with now is forking a template repo on GitHub that kind of has some initial setup instructions. And that's really been structured toward keeping the project cheap and really lightweight, beginner friendly, and also not super resource intensive. The only cost involved would be wherever the actual meetings are stored. And otherwise, it's all, if you've got the project running open source, then it's entirely free to run and get set up. Create the scrapers. So yeah, like I mentioned before, everything other than the static file storage, it's free, and we're completely open to hosting any of those static files on S3 or Azure, and then kind of adapting the project to your use case and interests. So we're just writing simple, pretty Python web scrapers using Scrapey. Travis CI is a testing and build system that's free for open source projects, and you can just set the scrapers up to run daily on that. And then everything is writing the output to just static, new line delimited JSON. You've got flexibility in terms of the formats that you write to. That's kind of what we're setting up out of the box. And then in our case, documenters.org is pulling in all of these scrape results daily, and kind of to make the management a little easier, a lot of the common functionality that we've found to be useful, including things like identifying when meetings are canceled based off of previous scrape results, and kind of adhering to a generally common standard data format, is all in a City Scrapers core package that is just installed as part of the template setup. So in terms of the outputs, we've got the very clear output on our end of documenters.org. We're definitely open to folks having their meetings hosted on our site. We're a little focused on states, meetings that are focused to State Open Meetings Act. But I mean, the Pittsburgh meetings that are currently on documenters.org. And so we're definitely happy to talk more about anyone who would like those meetings to be on documenters.org as well. We've also looked at custom applications. We have the link we can go out to, people can take a look at after, but just a really simple static site that pulls the latest scrape results and displays them on a calendar of upcoming meetings. And then on documenters.org, and something that's relatively simple to set up as well, you can have a calendar feed for all of your meetings or for specific agencies that people can subscribe to on Google Calendar, Outlook, and have their own kind of custom information there. So that's, and then, I mean, people have also, we initially started using Google Sheets and Airtable as an output. So you have a lot of different options there, but it's not all kind of either documenters.org or just making another custom application. There's a lot of kind of standard tools that can be used here. So what we can provide are the City Scrapers Slack. It's a channel on our City Bureau General Slack, the City Scrapers Toolkit, which I take it a lot of people have seen already at cityscrapers.org. S3 or Azure static file hosting, like we mentioned, and potentially documenters.org, kind of depending on the specifics of the meetings. We cannot provide development time currently. On-call support, we're definitely happy to troubleshoot and talk through things in the Slack, but that'd be kind of when we're available and kind of when things are going on there, or hosting for application servers. We definitely wanted to keep this as static as possible for the reason of cost, so we can't host any additional servers, just the static files that people are writing out to.
All right. Daryl here. I am happy to go through any of these early slides for folks who joined recently. We designed this to be fairly quick to save folks time, but also to make a lot of time for particular questions where we could be most helpful. So at this point, I'll open it up to questions, and that could include just some background on what we talked about early on, or getting in as deep as the coding issues, into the process of bringing volunteers or contract folks or staff on board. Anything you have in mind, we are happy to discuss at this point, and then we'll end the call there. So we can see some folks, so please feel free to unmute yourselves, and we will just make do as we go. Oh, and feel free to use the question box as well. I see one question here. Would you recommend partnering with local journalists? Yes, absolutely. I think there are a few things to be cautious of there, but I think also there's a lot of opportunity as well. So City Bureau is a media organization. I'm a journalist. A lot of the folks in our network and our staff are journalists. We often have, increasingly so, documenters tips, things that come in through meeting minutes, through agendas, through our field coordinator India when she spots things in live tweets or meeting minutes. Those are increasingly becoming story tips, story leads. We have access to a very broad base of documentation at this point. It's a fire hose information with all the minutes coming in, all the agendas, all the documentation. So we're seeing stories emerge earlier than when they become headlines. So I would say, yes, I would recommend partnering with local journalists. My caution is that I wouldn't want to see a program like Documenters become a way to supplant journalists. So that being said, I would say keep in mind that Documenters can be used to work in collaboration with journalists. We don't want to see it turn into a kind of program where it's used as cheaper labor to replace journalists. So that kind of collaboration, that mode of getting people involved in civics, that's where that intersection of Documenters and Civic Paper Code lies, really. I'm going to go down this list, and feel free to pop in, but I'll read the questions out loud. Let's see. Our public documents and calendars are so widely spread out, I'm not sure scrapers even make sense. Are you sure those scrapers save you labor time compared to manually gathering meeting information? Pat, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, that's the case we've seen everywhere. But I think...
Oh, wait, are you?
No, I think I can, yeah. So that's the case we've seen everywhere, but it's really over time where it starts to pay off. Like for a given couple months, no, it might not make much sense, but in aggregate, in between like the 64 agencies, it really would be time cost prohibitive to kind of go through that manually. So I think for
Cool. Pat, I think you were on mute. You want to do that one again?
yeah, I think so. Can people hear? I'm not sure which one I'm coming through, but I didn't know that.
Can anyone hear Pat? We're just trying to make sure we weren't on mute.
Oh, perfect.
Cool.
Great. So yeah, all I said before is in cases where it's super spread out is actually when the scrapers are useful. I think because over time, it's somebody would have to check each one of the. Perfect. Thank you. Just saw that in the chat. So let's see. Yeah, but kind of when you need to go to so many sites over and over and over again, it's really easy to miss things. So I think, I mean, yeah, when we're deciding to schedule assignments, especially for agencies that don't have nearly as many meetings, it's easy to lose things that might not be scraped or getting put in manually. So I think the scrapers definitely do pay off the more meetings you're looking at.
Next question is, how do you sort through the fire hose of data? That is a great question, and exactly the one that we're focusing on in the next few months. So what we've done is essentially taken all of the documents that are coming in, the minutes, the agendas, and put them into an Airtable to make them more searchable. So our next step is to hire a reporter that will be producing a regular daily or weekly newsletter that will contextualize the information, curate it, do some original reporting, like calling up these folks that are at these meetings and produce that for the public. Currently, what we're doing is having our field creator essentially make notes on what pieces of information are story tips and which are essentially points that will require more original reporting. What we're trying to do is see early on how far in advance we're seeing this information develop before it becomes a headline. So our next step is basically to refine and structure the process of curating that information. But for right now, anecdotally, we are seeing a lot of things that should become stories, will become stories, and trying to work through what format that takes. Should it be a newsletter? Should it be a website? Should we combine it with our current newsletter? Are all the questions that we're interested in. Next question. How do you plan to address providing these tools to non-English speaking folks? Thank you for asking that. That is high on our list. So for one thing, we are looking at simply translating this website into Spanish. So that will be documenters.org. Secondly, we're finding there's a lot of larger structural issues with conversion into Spanish language, in that if you go to meetings, 9 times out of 10, they are not translating it into Spanish to begin with. So we're looking at partnering with groups like Univision Chicago to bring in more bilingual documenters so that they can go attend these meetings and bring out information in English and Spanish. That way we're getting information to both communities and can add to the site. Some other ideas would be to translate our meeting notes into Spanish. Beyond that, we are very open to ideas. So this is a process that's underway and we're looking into, but I wouldn't say right now that we have the final answer because there are some larger problems beyond our control that we need to address first. I'm reading one question down. Can you talk about how you maintain relationships with your documenters over time and what goes into community management? Yes, this is so critical to the documenters program. We hired a field coordinator who essentially works one-on-one with documenters every day, every week. So that includes reviewing content, giving feedback directly to them. That includes making sure they know where to go and when. That includes making sure they have contextual information before they go into meetings. So that could involve sending them relevant news stories, relevant reports, academic research, things that can help them get a better grip on the issues before they go in. If you go to documenters.org and click on the Become a Documenter button, there is a button about halfway down that says Explore the Field Guide. So we produced a field guide for documenters that can be downloaded right onto their phone so that when they're at a meeting, they can open it up and get really quick tips on how to thread a live tweet thread. What are some suggestions for taking the best kinds of meeting notes, where to sit in the room, how to get the best information, a range of different issues that we've seen documenters come across. So there's a FAQ, a lot of information. So the community or our field coordinator does a lot of work to not just coordinate and manage documenters, but to make sure that they're satisfied, they have the information they need, and that they know where to go. Additionally, we hold annual summits. So we invite the entire pool of documenters to come in one location at one time and do a variety of trainings, a variety of asset mapping, a lot of workshops. And lastly, part of the process of becoming a documenter is, one, to fill out the application on the website, but two, to come to a training. So all documenters have to come to at least one training in the role they want to perform. So we have trainings on meeting notes interviewing, trainings on live tweeting social media, and trainings on open meeting law. So the Open Meetings Act, the Fair Report privilege. If documenters want to take a live tweeting assignment, they have to have completed an in-person live tweet training. So all of those different approaches is kind of the universe of how documenters are maintained, communicated with, and those relationships are built over time. Next question is, can you talk about funding and paying the documenters? How much money did it take to get the in-person, non-tech part of this process off the ground in Chicago? The funding. So City Bureau is a nonprofit 501c3, so we have funding partners organizations. We are also member supported, so the $8, $25, $50 a month that members provide in large part goes to funding staff, but in a large part goes to funding documenters who we think of as staff in some sense. So getting it off the ground, the Documenters program was originally conceived at a group called Smart Chicago. In 2016, when Smart Chicago closed, we reframed that program for a civic journalism lab. So we began increased number of meetings that are being sent out and increasing number of documenters. We pay documenters, well, it was 2 months ago, $15 an hour. We just gave them a raise, so now it's $16 an hour. But long answer short for your question, the funding that City Bureau derives from member support, from contract work, consulting, from revenue, from stories that we produce in the fellowship, and from foundation support is really the foundation for support that goes to documenters. Next question is, how do I get an invite to the Slack workspace? We will be sending out an email to everyone who signed up to this webinar today with an invite to the Slack. And on that Slack, you can do a variety of things. The community there goes in waves. When there's a lot of activity, people are sometimes meeting off-site once a week to code together. Other times, it might get a bit slower, but in general, that is the central location where you can ask questions. You can find folks who may be in your state or in your city who you can work with. And by the way, we highly recommend that people find the folks in their area to work with. I think could be a potential risk in duplication, but there is a lot of, there's a lot of positive reinforcement with people when they are just working together on the same thing to solve the problem for their city. I'm going to keep going here. What is your vision for documenters.org in terms of having listings for cities that do currently do not have a City Bureau presence? Would you consider open sourcing the rest of the web app behind documenters.org so that other communities can more easily set up and manage the assignments, etc., and own the volunteer membership data? Or are you envisioning a different route for collaboration on this? This is a big question and one of our organizational goals for this year. The short answer is that we are looking into licensing, essentially just what does it take to open source the code for the app, which we are planning on doing very soon, but also what kind of agreements, partnerships are required to make it sustainable. We don't want to see programs start off and then get momentum and get people involved and then end after a year. We want to see documenters programs that can be sustainable, that can find funding, whether in collaboration with us or individually, and can make sure that these kind of programs have a lasting impact so that when people get involved, they're able to rely on it to be there. let's see, I have a few other points there. We can kind of get into the weeds, but I think I might have to save a bit of that for a future webinar. Let's see. Easily set up and manage assignments. Pat, do you have anything to add to that point?
No, I mean, I think the one thing I would say is that, yeah, it would be cheaper to do like a static set if you just want to show the meetings. But yeah, I think it is, we get into more of the licensing question and like program longevity question when we talk about managing the program. So yeah, the only thing I would say is that the app really isn't necessary for just showing meetings. It comes in handy when you want to manage assignments.
And the last point I'll make on this question as well is that we've spent the last year plus in Detroit answering this exact question, working with WDET, which is the NPR affiliate in Detroit, a group called Citizen Detroit, and a group called Outlier Media. So in Detroit, very differently from City Bureau, the Documenters pilot program there is shaping up to be a collective run by multiple organizations at one place. But the point being there, we spent the last year just learning how to replicate this program. We don't want to create a program that has an assumption that we can just take the model that happened in Chicago and plop it down somewhere else. That really won't be how it happens. So we're trying to find partners for pilots that help us understand how it could be best replicated. So that will mean, one, we're looking for partners in rural areas. We have not explored what a Documenters program in a rural area will look like, but my own personal opinion is that that's where we will see its potential really thrive. In areas where we see news deserts, in areas where we see newspapers closing, how can we encourage, support, and equip people to fill some of the gaps while we rebuild the news ecosystem? So I hope that answers the question. Sign up for our newsletter, I'd say, and when you're invited to the Slack, we will find ways to keep communicating about how we plan to replicate and expand the program. So this last question here, what types of orgs have you heard from that are interested in building their own scraper? Is it newsrooms, community orgs, freelancers, etc.? That's a good question for a lot of the folks here. We might be able to open it up and get a quick survey of who's in the newsroom and who's from a community organization. But my anecdotal response to this has been that it is largely newsrooms that have a developer on staff who feel like they can get going right away. And on the other hand, community organizations and individuals who are actually already doing the work of attending public meetings in a sort of unofficial capacity that are looking for the type of capacity that newsrooms have. So part of our goal with getting people on the same call is to see who's working in the same city. Can we pair up a newsroom that has capacity for development in the Bay Area with a group that is attending meetings unofficially in the Bay Area and create more interaction, more collaboration, so that one group may be answering the question of scrapers and the other can begin the work of how do we use the information that's coming from scrapers to attend meetings. One more question here. Tech question. Is my understanding that the city scrapers core is separate from the scrapers? Pat, I'm going to let you take this one.
Yeah, it's just a lot of common functionality, simple pieces that make it a little easier for people to take in updates. But the City Scrapers core is also open source, so contributions are welcome there. That's more of an organizational thing. We wanted to make sure that each time we make updates that multiple people could benefit from, it's a little easier for people to pull those in while still maintaining separate spiders that don't have to relate to each other.
So I'm reading through the questions real quick to make sure I didn't miss one in the process. If you have any last questions, please do feel free to log them or just say them out loud. We've got about 10 minutes more. If we end early, that's fine, but we're also happy to stick around and keep chatting. Okay, I'll give it another minute or so. And again, I'm also happy to go back a bit and talk about City Bureau, talk about the code, or anything else. Pat, do you have anything else to add?
No.
Okay. All right. If that's all the questions, we will end it here. Thank you so much for joining us. Look out for an email from me coming soon with a invite to our Slack and some more resources, including our cityscrapers.org toolkit. We'll think of some more resources that we have in line, but oh, yeah, last question. Will you post this webinar? Yes, we will. I will include a link to the webinar with the email going out shortly. All right. Thanks again, all. If you have any questions, please feel free to email us, hit us up on Slack once you get there. We're happy to talk further, and we'll end it here. Am I muted? Was I muted at the end? I'll keep sticking around in case anyone has other questions too.
I think you're still on.
Okay. If anybody wants to ask questions with less folks, now is a good time. We'll stick around. Okay.